Welcome to the Westminster News Podcast, your alternative to the mainstream media.
Oh yes, it's that time again. Another edition of the Westminster News Podcast. I hope you guys are doing well, especially those of you over at westminster.club who got the bonus show with me and Martin earlier this week. Martin, how are you doing, mate?
Doing very well. There's wind in my sails at the moment. The podcast is going really good. I think there's a really fascinating landscape out there with the media, who we trust, where we go, what the future holds. And Michael, I'm very, very enthused by the enthusiasm, repeating my words there, of the response to what we're doing. And I think an increased fragmentation of what's out there. We'll talk a bit in the BBC. We'll talk soon about Channel 4. I think there's real appetite for change in the air, Michael.
Absolutely. And as I said, we're so thankful that you guys are subscribing and listening and leaving great reviews. And of course, those of you over at westminster.club who are going to get bonus shows and lots of juicy extra content on our Patreon. Now, I want to start with a very concerning story, Martin. The lockdown, the numbers have come out today. UK workers on company payrolls have fallen 649,000 during lockdown as the coronavirus crisis claimed another 74,000 jobs last month, according to official figures. You know, this is the economic reality, I'm afraid, and I fear there's much more to come of this unprecedented action of this lockdown.
Yeah, and I think we're just seeing the beginning of this. I think people like ourselves said from the very beginning that there'll be greater casualties from the economic impact of the lockdown than there ever would be from the actual virus itself. Still, this rages on, Michael. Do we have to wear masks in shops? That seems to be coming in on the 24th. I did a poll on Twitter. I know they're about as accurate as reading tea leaves, but nevertheless, it does seem that most people will comply. 2/3 say they'll go along with it, albeit reluctantly, but there's huge concerns about the impact on retail, about footfall on the high street as a massive concern. Lots of those jobs coming from those sectors. And I just think my thoughts are with anybody who's listening, who's been affected by this. I'm one of those people who didn't receive a penny throughout the entire lockdown. I'm a director of a private limited company that employs just myself. I've managed to soldier through, and I hope everybody who's listening is soldiering through too. And love to you all.
Absolutely, guys. I mean, you know, it's very, very hard times for a lot of people at the moment. And that's why with this show, the feedback I get a lot of the time, Martin, is that people realise times are tough. They know that. They're not stupid.
Yeah.
But what they are looking for is not just the constant feed from the mainstream media of misery. And so it's important to also highlight positive stories. And one thing that I think, it is a positive story is that food chains are going to cut prices as for the £4 billion VAT cuts from the government come into force. When you look at the likes of McDonald's, when you look at Nando's, we look at Pret a Manger, all of these groups saying they're passing the temporary VAT savings onto customers. Of course, they join Wetherspoon, who are doing the same. And it does show you, in a time where we were told, and it was stoked up by Project Fear, that if we left the EU, when we left the EU, the prices would skyrocket across the board. We are actually seeing prices go down in some of these stores. And very interesting, Martin. It always amazes me, when I post positive news, reducing prices. How can that not be a good story? And yet, of course, you get the usual trolls on Twitter who say, "Oh, it will make people fat. Isn't it terrible?" I mean, come on. If you can't be at least just reflect and be a little bit happy and positive about the news that prices are reducing, then you must be one miserable sod.
But there are a lot of those miserable sods about, Michael. Isn't it funny, though, how we were told there'd be no sandwiches left in Britain at all, let alone they'd have...
I remember that. That was on the BBC even, wasn't it? Newsnight, there was a guy on there talking about the lack of sandwiches.
Yeah, there'd be no sandwiches left in Britain, at which point a lot of us rolled our eyes and thought, are these people high, or are they just so biased they can't see the wood for the trees? Maybe a combination of the two. Michael, I've got a couple of questions for you.
Hit me.
Brexit or Remain?
Brexit.
Brown sauce or red sauce?
Red.
Pepsi or cola?
Cola.
Big Mac or Whopper?
Oh, it's got to be a Whopper.
Right. That's the point here. The reason I did that quick fire quiz, Michael, is because Burger King are not passing on the VAT benefits to their customers, because of course we must bear in mind that while the big chains can use this as leverage and enticement to people to go and spend money in their stores, not everybody is passing this on because not everybody can afford so. And I think it's worth pointing out that while this is great news, we shouldn't slam those that aren't doing this, because the VAT cut was actually designed to stimulate businesses to retain staff, or even, Michael, to even be able to their ability to survive the economic impact of the lockdown. But look, it is great news. This is happening. And another point that I make repeatedly on this podcast is our ability to be nimble and to make VAT changes to support business will be greatly enabled, Michael, when we finally leave the European Union. We should be supporting British business. And I hope that this does stimulate the grassroots and encourage people to spend. But the feedback so far about this VAT cut, Michael, has been very, very positive.
Absolutely. And a shout out, by the way, to ASOS. They're the latest company I've seen who actually said they're going to repay furlough cash to the government after it saw sales jump as housebound shoppers bought more lockdown products. So, you know, we often hear about evil capitalists and money's bad from the sort of Corbynista losers who got rejected at the last election. But actually, you know, there are entrepreneurs and companies and businesses who are willing to actually do the right thing. And that deserves highlighting because, again, the constant diet of negativity and being downbeat serves no one very well. We've got some hard times coming. Of course we have. We've been through hard times. We've got more hard times coming, but it's also worth highlighting positive things as well. Speaking of which, a huge reaction on a westmonster.com story. And by the way, guys, remember to go to westmonster.com for the news you need on the big stories. I don't know if you saw this, Martin. I spoke to the campaign director of Defund the BBC. They are running a national billboard campaign, or they're planning to. They've already got one billboard up, planning to roll these out across the country. And at the moment, I've got to tell you, every time something about the BBC and the licence fees mentioned, there's a huge reaction. I can feel it out there across the country now, Martin. This is building huge momentum.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Do you remember when Led by Donkeys did their billboard campaign? They were constantly slamming Nigel Farage, Brexit, the entire thing. Everybody loved that on social media. And then suddenly, Defund the BBC are running these billboards. And I think they're really clever. They're really funny. It says, "Are you still paying?" ? And it's got Gary Lineker and Emily Maitlis on the billboard with their salaries in big, vulgar price tickets on them. £1.75 million per year for Lineker, £260,000 per year for Emily Maitlis. And I think this is great grassroots activism. And we've seen this already go further than the usual people would expect to be enthusiastic about this. Ben Bradley MP for Mansfield has said that's it, no more licence fee. And I know we're going to talk soon, Michael, about where the BBC's money is going. Huge, huge questions about the future of the BBC. And at the moment, Michael, public mood, I think, is against their woke, anti-British bullshit. Sorry to swear.
No, absolutely well said. And I think Andrea Jenkins, another Conservative MP, has actually written a piece for Westminster Today. She's also saying, look, we need to have a serious chat about the BBC and its format and moving forward. You know, I took a look, Martin, at we're going to talk about the job cuts, but I took a look at what the top, and the last set of figures, the top 12, the top dozen earners at the BBC pocketed a combined at least 7.18 million. That's in the context of a BBC that has just announced yesterday that 520 jobs are going. How on earth can it make sense that we're talking about things like that people really value, like local radio and regional TV, you know, people that rely on this sort of public service information, whilst millions are being given every year to a very small group of celebrities? That isn't what the licence fee should be paid for. It should be used for, should it? You shouldn't. I mean, there should be, in my opinion, there should be a salary cap. It should be about 100,000. You shouldn't be able to become a millionaire off of license fee money. The BBC should be where up and coming talent makes its name. I mean, think how many. This is always the one that gets me. The likes of Gary Lineker, etc. on Match of the Day. Think how many football journalists the BBC employs who would love to present that show. They're already employed by the BBC. Use them. Experts, people that write about football all day long, that go to the games. Why aren't they presenting it on a fraction of the wage? It's ridiculous.
I obviously completely agree. And people go, well, I mean, if we're going to cap Lineker's salary, then it'll go to Sky News.
Go on,
fine.
Then.
Yeah,
Who
go.
cares?
Yeah,
is anyone going to stop watching Match of the Day because a football journalist is presenting it and not Gary Lineker? Absolute bollocks.
And Michael, if they do stop watching it, so what? Since when has the BBC really been about ratings? It used to be about public service broadcasting for the masses. It was never about celebrity viewing figures. It was never about matching the private sector pay. And now it is. It's standing between two camps. It's trying to compete with Sky News, yet Sky Sports, yet it's forcing us to pay through the nose for these overpriced lovies. And particularly the first story you mentioned at the top of the show, Michael, about huge job cuts. If anything, the COVID lockdown, the crisis, I think, is putting a magnifying glass over all of this stuff. The same as it is about media bias, the same as it is about Black Lives Matter, the same as it is about all kinds of issues. And I think it's a huge wake-up call. And all of this, I think, is some of the more positive stuff that's come out of the lockdown, because people are reflecting, they are gauging their priorities, and the BBC license fee is really, really under the crosshairs.
Yeah, and technology is changing the game, Martin. I mean, that's what allows us to do this podcast and reach thousands of people, and for people to support us over at westmonster.club, and people get their news from westmonster.com. It's absolutely fantastic. But I'll give you a clear example of how much technology has changed and made the BBC less relevant. Match of the Day, and I keep going back to it because there's such huge money paid to the people on there. Match of the Day used to be where if you wanted to see the highlights of the footy games that weren't on TV, you'd have to go and watch it. Within minutes now, or within hours at least, the highlights of these games now are often put on Twitter and on YouTube. Yeah, they're already out there. You don't actually need to watch it anymore. They're not, that sort of sense of exclusivity and eyeballs has drained away. And so these huge payments in an internet age where clips are almost instantaneously available online is just ridiculous. It's totally outdated. And as I said, I spoke to Rebecca Ryan, who's the campaign director of Defund the BBC. She said that the billboard is the first of hopefully many that will be cropping up across the country. And she said the mainstream media are hoping that if they ignore the Defund the BBC, we will quietly disappear. I don't think that's going to happen, Martin. I think you've seen that, they've really seemed to have struck a chord with the public, who are just saying, look, it's 2020 and the license fee's got to go.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, it's no longer a rag bag of extremists, racists, call them whatever you like. The usual expletives they apply, the smears. This is actually out there in the provinces. People like my parents, very socially conservative, from the old school political left, voted for Brexit, obey the laws, and they watch what they're fed. And their BS detectors are constantly twitching about immigration is the solution. Multiculturalism is brilliant. Brexit is terrible. Black Lives Matter is really important. We should metaphorically take the knee. They're being force-fed social politics that they just do not chime with them, Michael. It really, really sticks in the craw. Diversity is everywhere. And I know we're about to move on to job cuts at the BBC. And isn't it funny, Michael, how we're told 1 week that the BBC is spending 100 million quid on diverse and inclusive content, yet it's excluding the core BBC viewers, Michael.
Yeah, I briefly mentioned it earlier, but it was announced that, it was originally 450 jobs that were going to be cut at BBC News. It's now going to be 520. Things like Politics Live's going down to 4 days a week. There's talk about what's going to happen with Andrew Neil and things like that. And I'm sorry, but my point is very simple. How can you, at a time where you're cutting 520 people, be paying millions of pounds of license fee money to a small group of people, and as you say, allocate £100 million to what they're describing as diverse and inclusive content. And by the way, that £100 million just seems to be a figure that they've sort of done for media purpose. I mean, where it's such a rounded number. Did they just sort of come up with that number for PR purposes? I mean, you can't have. It's hard to have sympathy for an organisation that, on one hand, is cutting back, as I said, things that people really care about, like local radio and regional TV, and at the same time saying, "Oh yeah, well, we've got 100 million for diverse and inclusive content." I mean, it just does not add up, does it?
Yeah, but also diverse content doesn't extend as far as diverse takes on politics or immigration or social matters. And it was interesting you mentioned Andrew Neil. The Andrew Neil show has fallen under the axe. There was a big outcry about this yesterday on social media because he is undoubtedly, in my opinion anyhow, the number one political commentator the BBC has, and he actually is open-minded to things like capping immigration, to Brexit, to the things actually that chime with the majority of the British population, and yet he's been kind of sidelined. There is talk he may get his own one-on-one interview show, but nevertheless, it does make you wonder where their priorities lie, because diversity, I mean, today, for example, Michael, I tuned into the breakfast show on BBC Radio 4, and it really struck me. And this is I know, but I sometimes I sort of lick the ice cube tray of the media. Do you know what I mean? I even tune in to James O'Brien some days. I mean,
there you go.
I feel like putting my head in the oven afterwards, but I do like just to sort of listen to what they're doing to make sure I'm making the right decisions not to listen. And BBC Radio 4, it still sounds to me, and it has since I was a boy, growing up in Nottinghamshire and the coal mine areas, it still sounds like they're like, hello.
Yeah.
It doesn't speak to people like me, working class lads. There's still no one at the BBC that sounds like me or has the background as me or the politics as me. And I think that's the real cancer at the heart of this. They talk about diversity, but it's actually a skin deep diversity inside your brain. What's between your ears? I don't see any diversity, Michael, at the BBC.
No, and I saw a report a couple of years ago. I can't remember who it was by, but it was a sort of social mobility group who actually looked into. And I think at the end of the day, you can talk about diversity all you want. I think actually the big issue here is class. I think it was with Brexit. I think it was with immigration. I think it's about, and as I said, I saw a report that looked at what percentage of journalists in the UK are privately educated. And I think it had actually gone up slightly in sort of 2016 versus in the 1980s. And I think that plays through. I think, these people are not from working class areas. They live in quite detached, different lives to most voters, which is why time and time again, whether you talk about Trump, whether you talk about Brexit, whether you talk about Boris Johnson getting a large majority, it sort of comes like a sucker punch out of nowhere to them because they simply, and another thing is because it's so London based, and we've talked about this before, but because it's so London centric, all the media live in London, a lot of them come from London, a lot of them are privately educated in London. What happens is, I think people that are so London centric, they start to think that the rest of the country is like London, and it isn't. If you look at the voting patterns of London and the wealth in London, it is an anomaly. It is the exception to the rule. The rest of the country is not like London. It is a bubble. And I think people forget that. And when they're, when they take that cultural and political approach of what they describe as being neutral or unbiased, it's from that London-centric point of view. Now, imagine, for instance, the BBC was based in a place like Ashfield, Martin. Yeah. Now, if you went down to the local coffee shop down there, I think it would be quite a different experience to getting a latte out and about in some of in sort of Oxford Street, etc.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And it's really interesting because yesterday there was a report out from the editorial director of the BBC. I almost choked on my latte. If I don't drink latte,
you're a skinny white man, surely, no?
I'm black, no sugar. But the point is this: it said that he actually admitted yesterday that BBC employees have become addicted to the toxic brainwash mentality of Twitter. This is the editorial director of the BBC,
Do
Michael.
something about it then.
Exactly. And so stop spending all your time doing Twitter clickbait. Stop baiting white people. Stop baiting the working classes, and actually look at your demographic. Now, I've worked for 25 years in the media. I've worked on women's magazines, men's magazines, tabloids, broadsheets, newspapers, radio, TV, and the number one point, you sit down and go, right, who are our consumers? What is their life? What interests them? Let's make content that reflects that, rather than saying, no, the way you think is wrong, the way you act is wrong. You must comply to the way that we think. We're better educated than you. We know better than you. It's a tragic, tragic conundrum. They get it wrong every single time, Michael. And at the moment, I can't see a way out of this for the BBC. They are going further and further down the rabbit hole of identity politics. They're alienating more and more people. And I absolutely think that Defund the BBC should carry on and just drive a stake through the heart of this relic of an institution.
Well, I want to move on, but I just think it's important. I mean, I'm someone now who, in terms of podcasts, the app to me now, I almost treat that like my remote control. I listen to, there's a trigonometry podcast, there's the James Dellingpole podcast, there's a range, there's sport stuff on there. Of course, you've got this. I think it's really important now that people actually vote with their feet and actually start subscribe to a lot of this stuff online, because I think the quality of the content is much more in touch with the public mood. It's much more grounded, it's higher quality. And of course, you should, if you can, support those, because at the end of the day, we don't get a guaranteed license fee, and nor do a lot of other people. So do support shows if you can. Of course, Westminster.club is our Patreon if you want to support this show. I just want to move on now, Martin, too.
Yeah.
It's another issue, and I'm going to keep raising it. It's another issue that you'll seldom see much mainstream media interest, and it's the migrant crossings.
Yeah.
We've seen more. We saw 180 migrants and 15 boats on Sunday. Yesterday, another 85 migrants on 6 boats. And, the range of nationalities, everything from Syrian to Egyptian, Turkish and Iranian. Priti Patel was sat in front of MPs yesterday. She described the crossings as shocking, appalling and unacceptably high. But they go on, Martin.
Yeah, and it's something we've been talking about a lot on this podcast. But I do think that Priti Patel is striking the right chords. A very interesting thing that came out of this, she said that she's had some admittedly very, very difficult conversations with her counterpart in France. Because here's the issue. Let's just get to brass tacks. If we have people that get all the way to Calais, they've come through a multitude of countries before that, which of those they could have claimed asylum in, but they want to get to the UK because it's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Now, the moment they leave French shores and they're in French waters, there appears to be literally no appetite for the French Navy or any form of maritime interception to get those people back to France. It's almost like, well, they're in their dinghy now, they're Britain's problem. And therein lies the rub. So what's the solution? Do we have to literally monitor our waters, patrol them with vessels, with Navy ships, with interceptors that send them back to France? How would that look? What would the optics of that be like? The political fallout is quite large. It would really, I think, be a hardcore move. But I think that's what needs to be done. And if we're looking at saving £1 billion a month by not contributing to the coffers at Brussels, I think a great many people would support a more robust maritime service, not to taxi people back to Britain, where they're very, very unlikely to ever be deported from. And Michael, while I'm on the media, have you seen that little clip? Channel 4.
Oh, yeah.
Right. For those who haven't seen it, it's one of their metaphorical graphics of a fall rising out of the Straits of Dover, and it's carrying a bunch of migrants from the Channel and safely depositing them on the White Cliffs of Dover. And of course, the people are highly trained medical specialists, pilots, NHS workers, vulnerable women and children. That's the picture that the media paints of these individuals. If you look at the people on them, Michael, we all can see with our own plain eyes They are young men who are sent first as a spearhead for the rest of their families. There's a media myth around this, and I think we've been banging on about it for years. The public care, but the media's got little interest, Michael.
Well, I saw I've been speaking to the Home Office and getting the official reports on what's been going on. I can tell you now that the overwhelming majority of the boats coming over don't have any females on them. Some obviously do, but most of them are just men. That's the information from the Home Office directly. Now, Priti Patel yesterday, and again, we keep highlighting, she is saying the right thing. She said to MPs, I feel there could be stronger enforcement measures on the French side, and they have heard that from me. We want to break this route. We want to make this route unviable. And in my view, the only way we can do this is by intercepting and returning the boats back to France. So there you go, from the Home Secretary. The only way that this is going to stop and the route will be deemed or be viewed as unviable is if the UK starts intercepting and returning boats back to France. And I think that's correct. The problem is, Martin, it's all well and good saying that, but how much longer is this going to continue without that actually happening?
Well, that is the big question, because words are easy, words are cheap, action is more difficult, and action can be very expensive and have ramifications. But certainly the mood music is good, and I just hope, and I know that you do too, Michael, that this action actually happens.
Absolutely. I mean, all I can say is imagine if Corbyn's lot was in charge of this. You'd absolutely have no hope. I mean, at least Priti Patel, to her credit, has the right intentions, but we need to start seeing some delivery because, as I said, this is going on near enough on a daily basis now. Now, you mentioned Channel 4 earlier, Martin. Channel 4 News with a tweet yesterday. If you saw this, this is referring to Bristol. Yeah. Out with the slave trader, in with black power. An actual Channel 4 News tweet. Yeah. And this was reference to the statue of the Edward Colston having been removed, obviously, replaced with a sculpture of a Black Lives Matter protester.
Now, if you want to talk about the media and its agenda, again, I bring you back to a point at the top of the show. COVID-19, the lockdown, is giving us all time to actually pause and reflect and look at the truth and what's going on. And this story crystallizes everything. So here's what happened. The Colston statue was ripped down. We all know about that. It was dumped in the harbour. The mayor, Marvin Rees, basically said, well, it was a bit awkward. The people who did it received a caution, a slap on the wrist. Nobody was charged. And then a lovey, an absolute embodiment of the London metropolitan elite, a British artist called Mark Quinn, Mark with a C. I've never trusted people who don't spell their name correctly, Michael. Separate thing. Mark with a C, Quinn, a 56-year-old white middle-aged metropolitan ponce, right? Basically commissioned a statue of the black lady who stood before the statue of Colston before it was ripped down. Her name is Jen Reed. They put it up illegally without planning permission overnight. And guess what? Channel 4 News just happened to be there to film the whole thing. Michael, they are supporting a Marxist organisation that wants to desecrate and destroy our history and heritage. They are promoting an illegal act without planning, and they expect us to go, yeah, do you know what? Right on. Now, the statue was taken down, I think correctly, because it would have been vandalised. And you can bet your bottom dollar, Michael, that if people had turned up in the cold night and ripped that statue down of the Black Lives protester, they would not have got a slap on the wrist. It would have been a hate crime.
Yeah, and again, it's sickening to me to see the media whipping up sort of division. And the Bristol mayor, Marvin Rees, that you mentioned, he said that he made it very clear, the sculpture that has been installed was the work and decision of a London-based artist. It was not requested, and permission was not given for it to be installed. He said something really interesting. I just want to read a piece of his statement because I think this is a really interesting point. Yeah. He said, to this end, the future of the plinth and what is installed in it must be decided by the people of Bristol. This will be critical to building a city that is home to those who are elated at the statue being pulled down, those who sympathise with its removal but are dismayed at how it happened, and those who feel that in its removal they've lost a piece of the Bristol they know and therefore themselves. I mean, the angle I'm always going to come at from Martin is I don't want people to be divided. I don't want people, I think we need as a society is to recognise differences, but recognise that we're a democratic country. We're not mob rule. We're not mob rule. We are a democratic country with a magnificent future outside of the EU. But if we want to have these debates, they need to be done sensibly, they need to be done rationally, and they need to be sorted out at the ballot box. What we cannot start having is people ripping down statues as cops stand by, putting up their own ones, and this whole thing being stoked by the media. I think the whole thing is shameful. I think we cannot see a repeat of this. And as I say, if we want to have debates about statues or buildings or whatever, let's have it. Let's have a democracy. Let's have public votes, and let's act like the great democracy we are, not mob rule. That some, I've got to say, Martin, some seem disturbingly happy to go along with the idea that people can just turn up en masse and start doing what they want.
I think you've hit on a really interesting point here. And it's really nice that we're having a longer podcast today, Michael. So we're kind of ruminating ideas as we go along. And I think there's a bigger point here. It's not about statues. It's not about having a so-called democratic vote of who goes on a plinth, because that in itself could be divisive. There'll be a shortlist, no doubt, selected by the Mayor of Bristol, Marvin Rees. It's about the ballot box works, except the Liberal left continually lose everywhere. They get annihilated in Britain. They got annihilated in the USA. And the same is happening globally. Now, the Liberal left, who on the whole are better educated, more metropolitan, they don't like losing. They don't accept losing. And so what they do, they can't win at the ballot box, and they go around trying to cancel everybody they can, ripping down statues, stoking up division, using race relations as a grotesque spearhead for a backdoor route in for Marxist, anarchist organisations like Black Lives Matter to destabilise our societies, to destabilise public mood, to stoke up terror and division, because the ballot box doesn't work for them. So they have to use the fist. And I think there are worrying parallels with far less democratic societies on earth. And that is why it's really, really important that people have the courage and the strength to stand up to this tyranny, this bullying by a small percentage of people who happen to be in charge. They've got their hands on the levers of power. It's certainly in the media, absolutely in academia. There's a report out this week that said, Michael, that 90% of academics at Yale and Harvard, the elite American universities, are now from the Liberal left. 1% of academics are conservative. Now, we talk about diversity all the time. The young kids of today are not being taught diversity. They're not being taught tolerance. They're being told to disobey democracy. And I think, Michael, we've got to take a stand against this.
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, the point is, if you're a lefty, pro-EU Corbynista, you've not won a public vote in a very long time.
Yeah,
because the fact is, they've deluded themselves, and I've got to say it again, a lot of them are London-based. They've deluded themselves that the rest of the country agrees with them when it doesn't. They're totally out of touch with public opinion, and so they transfer what they're doing, their efforts, not to elections, but actually to try and pressurize and change society outside of that, which is some of what you've been seeing. And I'll give you another example. You're going to see a hell of a lot of this in the run up to the US election.
Oh, yeah.
Because just remember, as we had with Brexit, I mean, according to the opponents of Trump in America, I mean, the whole thing was organized by the Russians. I mean, do you remember that? That sort of demented conspiracy theory. I mean, it was even, of course, the BBC, but I remember they had a panorama special that was I'll never forget. It was entitled Donald Trump, the Kremlin candidate, ? I mean, this is like something out of sort of the conspiracy files. And yet this was being pushed frantically here and in America. I saw Joe Biden, of course, Trump's opponent in America. He had a graphic recently that they were pushing saying, fix Facebook beat Trump. Now, they probably didn't mean it how I took it.
Yeah,
but my
yeah.
thing on that was, well, oh, damn, this guy is incredibly efficient and direct in going around the mainstream media to get his message out. We must correct that. And of course, disgracefully, we've seen Twitter partially censoring the US president's tweets, some of them. I mean, this is dark stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, my thing on free speech, Martin, on terms of social media is very, very simple. If it's legal, you should be able to say it. If it's illegal under the laws or under whatever laws, then you shouldn't. That surely is free speech. If it's legal, you should be able to say it. If you're inciting, hatred or violence, of course you shouldn't. But that should be defined by the law, not by whether someone agrees or disagrees with it.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the little Lord Fauntleroy of the left, Owen Jones, has been on his high horse once again, sort of going around the last couple of weeks. It's quite a comedy show.
He blocked me years ago, so I don't see any of it.
Well, you're the lucky one. It won't block me, but yeah, he's basically going around saying cancel culture doesn't exist. Here's a guy that spends most of his time trying to get people fired that say something slightly controversial on social media if they work in politics, if they work in academia, if they work in the media, and all this kind of idea that you can cancel everybody who disagrees with you. Here's the thing. The silent majority, the law-abiding, socially conservative people who are decent and level-headed, they're starting to wake up to this because it's becoming, if you like, more mainstream in its news, and they don't like it. And all this stuff in America is going to be absolutely captivating all the way through to the presidential election later this year, because all this backdrop of social unrest, of cops being pilloried, cops being attacked. You've got young student-age campus college people, shoving and putting phones in the cops' faces, trying to provoke a reaction, filming everything. You've got statues being burned. You've got flags being torn down. Yesterday, Michael, the Los Angeles Times was actually saying we should cancel the Star Spangled Banner and replace it with Lean on Me, the pop song. Now, these people are, I believe, intellectually vacuous. They are bogus and dishonest, but they are chipping away at changing the fabric of American society. Here's what I think. Now, I called Brexit right. I called the previous Trump administration being elected right. I think Trump's going to win again. And I think these people are actively helping him, Michael. They want to destroy American society. And I think we're going to see a lot of Trump positioning himself in the media as the savior. Last time it was make America great again. This time I think it would be only I can save America from this mob.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is I just saw some polls out yesterday. I mean, if you're a betting man, now is your time to get the money onto Trump, because the polls, of course, some of these national polls now are showing, but Biden's got 11 or 12-point advantage. I've seen in some of them. I tell you what's going to happen. I think you're absolutely correct, but I think the big moment in these debates will in this election will be the debates. Yeah. The 3 debates where Trump goes toe to toe with Joe Biden. I think he's going to absolutely destroy him. And I think you're right, Martin. I think for far too long, because there's some sympathy, I believe, in the media, the far left have got a free pass. Yeah, they're running around. They are literally a mob. They are literally a mob. They're going around making demands, ripping down statues, as you say, burning flags, smashing up businesses. Unfortunately, I mean, some people in America have even been killed by these looters and these scumbags. And this isn't where mainstream society is. Ordinary, decent people want a country where they can earn a living, raise their kids, and be safe. They do not want this radical far left rewriting of history. And I think this, in terms of the cancel culture, I do also think, Martin, that the onus falls on people to actually turn around and say, which is how I view it, was, I don't care what these people think. The problem you've got is with things like Twitter is that big corporations and individuals, having 1,000 hardcore people bombard you with messages can feel like an overwhelming, insurmountable amount. It isn't. These people are a small fringe. If they weren't a small fringe, Jeremy Corbyn would be Prime Minister, Hillary Clinton would be President, but they're not. They represent a very small, extreme sect. And people need to have a reality check and recognise that and stop being bullied by some mouthy far lefties. And the police obviously need to be empowered by the government to deal with them.
Yeah, it's funny. There are also 180 job losses yesterday flagged at The Guardian. And, you know, I mean, I'm amazed that it even still sells in newspapers. They give all the content away for free. But the point is, you're right. They are a minority, but they do have an extraordinarily amplified influence.
That's exactly right, Martin. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. They're massively signal boosted way beyond their actual cultural or political relevance.
Yeah, but I do think that they are, I believe, we talk about useful idiots. I think Lenin first coined that phrase to academics, that just, you know, intellectuals that willfully hoovered up the grotesque carnage and oppression of communism. And talk back to Ashfield when I stood in the general election. Lee Anderson won that seat. Owen Jones marched in, wanted some FaceTime with me. I was washing my hair for the entire 6 weeks, but no interest in sitting down with that imbecile anytime this side of hell. But he tried to kick the ass out of Anderson's campaign. He's a straight talking former coal miner. And I sat down for this podcast with Lee Anderson in his office in Westminster as a newly appointed Member of Parliament for the Conservative Party for Ashfield. And he actually said to me, I'd like to thank Owen Jones and The Guardian because they helped me to get elected. And that, to me, you know, put a spring in my step. And I think sometimes we get obsessed with it as members of the media looking inwards. The vast majority of people see these people as the clowns they are.
Now, just to end on a positive note, as I say, that's what we like to do. Fundraising hero, Captain Sir Tom Moore, is to be knighted by the Queen in his own personal ceremony at Windsor Castle on Friday. The 100-year-old Second World War veteran will travel to the Berkshire Royal Residence with members of his family for the rare special event with the monarch. Captain Sir Tom raised almost 33 million for health service charities by walking laps of his Bedfordshire garden. Martin, he is truly the best of British, isn't he?
I don't think there'll be anybody who will complain about this, although, you know, don't rule it out. You know, we do live we do live in
don't speak too soon.
We do live in 2020 after all. But, you know, heroic. And you know, we often talk on this show, don't we, about the core British values, the core patriotic pride we have in flag, in Queen and King as it was then, and country, you know, serving the country at war. Sir Tom did that. They're the values that I believe should still fly high. The values that those on the left sometimes would like us to trample over. They'd like us to desecrate the cenotaph rather than celebrate everybody who fought. Sir Tom is one of the very, very best. And I, for one, will be raising a cut price pint to him later on, Michael.
Absolutely. Down at your local spoons, guys. As ever, guys, there's a great episode. Thanks a lot for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. If you would like the bonus shows, if you'd like to support us for lots of exclusive content, please go over to our Patreon at westmonster.club. But thank you very much for joining us. It's been great, and we will see you soon.
The very best of British.